This story takes place on Colares Island at the mouth of the Amazon River in Brazil. Though it's only about 2 hours away from the city of Belém, there's a world away of terms and culture and technology. Colares was a rural, quiet fishing community surrounded by jungle, along the river and the sea. It had a population of approximately 2,000 people, or villagers, in 1977. And that's when these horrific events took place, in 1977. The island's remoteness has given rise to many local superstitions. The villagers believe their island is mysterious and that a lot of phenomenon occurs there. They have their legends and traditions there. Okay? The village was simple. The villagers lived in wooden homes. Very little electricity was available, and oil lamps were common at this time. There may have been a few TVs around the village. However, the villagers were mostly disconnected from the everyday hustle and bustle of the city. They didn't watch the news. They didn't really have access to any of that. They didn't watch movies. They didn't play games. So they lived a simple life with tradition rooted in river life and religion. The religion, they're mostly Roman Catholic. There's a big church there, too. So they don't have a constant news cycle. The internet did not exist at this time. And the news they heard was word of mouth within the village, or if someone came back from the city with some news. So they have a community-centered life where neighbors, they all know each other, and they help each other, and they meet at community gatherings, and the gatherings are centered around the church and local beliefs. They had a cultural worldview of practicality and religion. They knew what they knew, and they dealt with reality as it came, just like the tides. So with that, let's begin. So everything started around August of 1977, okay? So Emilio Campos Oliveira, a long resident of the island, in 1977, he was part of the extraordinary and horrifying series of events that were happening. For him, it started on a warm night in October 1977 around 11 p.m. Emilio Oliveira got ready for bed and went to sleep in the living room. And he was laying there. What he says is suddenly a beam of light flooded the room, so powerful that it penetrated the ceramic tiles on his roof. He said the light was coming from above. Now, he also said the light attacked his thigh with a burning sensation. And as quickly as it appeared is how fast it vanished. He couldn't explain what happened, and he attempted to go back to sleep. But he was trying to figure it out, trying to go back to sleep, but he just couldn't. So he described a visible burn mark as a circle with red in the middle, and it had a black spot as well. Okay, so that's the first known event. And a few days later, around 8 p.m., another man, Orivaldo Malakis Pinheiro, he was out mud fishing with a friend on the beach. They were working the nets. Well, they weren't catching anything in that spot, so they decided to move. So when they were setting in the new spot, his friends just suddenly noticed something distant, like a distant light in the sky. They said there was no noise, there was no smell. And he looked out to the sea and he noticed that this light was coming from the sea towards them. They got scared. They took off running, panic-stricken. And then, when they're running, they're going back to the village, and they're going to tell them what they saw. Soon, dozens of people say that over the past few weeks, they had been chased as if being hunted down and attacked by the same kind of lights. And then, another witness came forward and described a strange encounter on the beach. Lucia Elena Marquez. She described lights over the beach and objects appearing. What she said is there were two lights that appeared in the sky with one light on and the other off, and they would alternate on and off, on, off. And they were also red and green, would alternate colors, and they were just going around in circles, just flying around in the sky. She was just at the market when her daughter and somebody else started yelling that there's something going on in the beach, and they went and saw this. So now what's going on is the whole village is talking about what's happening. So with this many witnesses, word soon reaches Carlos Mendez. He worked for a newspaper in Belém, Brazil. So he began receiving little bits of information through telephone calls with people linked to the town. And they were telling him that the newspaper should go over there because these lights were appearing and the villagers are scared. So he did. He went. So Carlos got his photographer and they go to the island. And as soon as they get there, they're swarmed by the villagers and they all wanted to tell their story. And things get kind of strange here too. One woman reported her leg and arms were paralyzed after a bright light entered the house through the roof. And then the next day, she noticed a puncture mark. It's right up here, in the shoulder area. She couldn't explain what had happened, only that she was terrified, and she still is. So there's a village doctor, Dr. Carvalho. She was 24 years old at the time. She ran the local clinic in the village, okay? Pretty soon, she started seeing many villagers. And she said that the burn marks were not typical heat burns, but more like radiation-type damage. She also described puncture marks within the burning areas, and there was no blood. And one of the strange things she talked about was she said that the wound would change from red to black in minutes. And to her, that made these injuries even more bizarre. It was just like a quick turning from red to black, and there were punctures in there. Lots of punctures. I'll have some pictures up in a minute. So patients continued to arrive with these circular lesions and puncture-like clusters with symptoms of weakness, dizziness, and some temporary paralysis. Some people describe being paralyzed immediately after being hit by this beam of light. Many victims described the sensation, once they got hit with the light, they described the sensation as a searing, burning pain, as if something was being taken out of them. They said it didn't feel like they were being cut into, nor did they describe a needle sensation, but just that somehow it felt as if the light was sucking something out of them, perhaps their blood. And this became so common that people just started to call the attacks the Chupa-Chupa, which means the sucker attacks, almost like the Chupacabra, the goat sucker, the blood sucker down there. So Dr. Willade Carvalho, she tried to explain all these conditions medically, with so many people freaking out, coming in with these red marks and punctures. She's trying to explain it to the best she can. But she was at a loss to explain for what was happening to cause these symptoms and burns with puncture wounds. She was initially going with the belief that it must be mass hysteria due to the talk of all the terrifying incidents being reported around the island. Her most disturbing cases began in September, though. Okay? This is before we heard about Emilio Oliveira. He's one of the first, but there were other things happening beforehand that weren't quite public yet to the villagers. A woman was brought to the clinic after being struck by the beam of light. She was taken to the clinic by her family in a state of spasms. Her mouth was shut tight, her eyes were closed, and she had no reflexes at all. She tried everything. So she was trying to stabilize this woman. She was in a horrible state. And she wasn't successful. There was nothing more she could do in the village, so they decided the best thing to do was send her to the hospital in Belém. There's no ambulances there, so they had to put her in a car and have her driven to the city. No ambulances on the island, and the closest hospital is in Belém, 2 hours away. So some residents took her to the island, to Belém, I'm sorry, and she was going to wait to see what the doctor said, give her an update. So as she was waiting for an update on her condition, another woman came in 5 days later, okay? She was struck by a strong beam of light while working in the yard. That's what was told to her. When they got her to the clinic, she was so stiff with paralysis that she was just sent straight to Belém as well. There was nothing she could do. She couldn't move her arms, her legs. She was rigid. So rigid, in fact, they couldn't just kind of like lay her in the car and kind of bend her legs to fit in there. She was so rigid her legs wouldn't bend, so that her feet were sticking out of the window. And she went all the way to Belém like that. So after a few more days had passed, Dr. Carvalho receives word from the hospital about her patients. They're both dead. The cause of death was listed as unknown. Dr. Carvalho suspects that the growing hysteria over the sightings may have caused a heart attack or a stroke. So, Dr. Carvalho, wanting to put an end to this hysteria, she goes to the mayor for help. Okay? The mayor then contacts the regional Air Force. The regional Air Force assigns someone named Captain Hollanda. Now, he's very important to the story. He was assigned to lead an investigation into the events of Colares. His mission is given the name Operation Saucer, or Operation Prato, but in English, Saucer. He assembled his team quickly, wasted no time. He knew he had to get over there. There was suspicion that there was a foreign country invading the airspace, so they were really going to see what is happening, who's coming here, why are they doing this. But when they arrive to the island, they set up tents and telescopes, and they try to proceed to calm the villagers down. Hey, we're here to help. Well, they're just to observe. Okay, they didn't take any weapons. So Captain Hollanda's first stop in town, though, after meeting with the villagers to calm them down a little bit, is to see Dr. Carvalho. That was at 6 a.m. So what he did is he went and he talked to Dr. Carvalho, and he asked her to tell the villagers that they're suffering from mass hysteria. Dr. Carvalho, though, she felt that the Air Force was not interested in hearing the truth, but in covering it up. She refused to go along with Captain Hollanda, especially with the villagers counting on her. And she had to keep her credibility with them. Her credibility is very important. She's only 24. She's running the clinic, so these people have to trust her. She don't want to break that trust because then she's lost the whole village, and it could get really bad as far as healthcare over there. They're going to be like, don't see her. Well, she stood her ground. She did the right thing. So while Hollanda was also there on the island, he met with local eyewitnesses. He was doing interviews. He was photographing the marks that the people talked about. And the sightings continued through the next few months. They had all their surveillance, and it was monitored 24 hours a day. Hollanda and his team took photos and made sketches as well. They conducted over 3,000 interviews with the residents. Only 2,000 people live on this island. They did 3,000 interviews. But Dr. Carvalho, she's still skeptical of the sightings, right? But around 6 p.m., on her way home from the clinic, she saw a woman faint. So she went to go help her. She's out down there on the ground trying to help this woman. She looks up, and she saw an object. She said it was at about the height of about a 10-story building. She described it as cylindrical, moving in elliptical movements, and then it would go back and forth, and it was right over her head. She was paralyzed by what she was seeing. She says it didn't have a specific color either. It didn't have a color of stainless steel, didn't have a color of silver, or the color of anything else. It had its own color. Now, according to witnesses, at the same time that this is happening, the military radar detected an unknown aerial object. As the military were adjusting their telescopes and cameras, the object had disappeared, and it went out to sea. Hollanda and his team conducted a surveillance on the island. They collected over 500 photographs, 1,500 hours of film, and the reports were sent back to the Air Force headquarters. Now, while they're out there on the island, word also gets back to ufologists or UFOologists, however you want to call it. I think it's ufologists. A.J. Gerard and Marco Petit. Now, they have a magazine down there that they run. Once they heard about this, they said they have to get down to the island and see what's happening. So they go investigate. So the same month that the UFO magazine people get there, Captain Hollanda was ordered to surrender all materials and return to Colmar, the Air Force. Everything is kept classified. They were ordered to shut down Operation Saucer immediately. This is in the end of December 77, so they've been out there for a few months. Thing is, no answers were ever given to the villagers. And over the next few months, reports subside and drift into local legend like everything else in that little village. However, with that said, in 1997, Captain Hollanda decided to break his silence and contacted A.J. Gerard and Marco Petit from UFO Magazine, two guys that went down there to investigate. He told them that he remembered them from Colares and respected what they did. He told them he could not speak with them back then because he was in the military. But now he's retired. And he'd like to tell his story, and if they're interested in what he had to say about Colares, he invited them to his house. I'm willing to bet if they would have given this man a good pension, he never would have opened his mouth. But I guess he didn't get one. So now he's not in the military, and he's willing to talk. This is the same man that head up everything. He organized everything, the whole investigation of Colares. So Mr. Gerard and Mr. Petit, they went as soon as they could, and they conducted videotape interviews with him. They stayed with Mr. Hollanda for 3 days, discussing the events surrounding the Colares incident and Operation Prato, or Saucer. Captain Hollanda indicated that he wanted to tell his story because he didn't want to carry it to the grave. He brought up a couple of times that he doesn't know how long he's going to live, so he had to tell his story. Now, maybe he was hearing things. I don't know if he knew something. Anyway, he gave his account of what he saw. Now, he reported one incident describing what sounded like an explosion, like thunder, brightness. This craft, it took off with incredible speed into the night sky. Then he also described another account of objects producing a low humming sound like an air conditioner, a dull sound with a faint clicking in the back. He goes like, but with a hum of an AC. And the clicking, he said, sounded like a ratchet underneath the sound. He said it was high up in the air, and it stopped, and it made a circle around him, and then it took off to the east. He came face to face with various objects in the sky. Some he described as 100 meters wide. That's about, that's more than 300 feet wide. That's huge. Now, he described in detail encounters with UFOs, two of which I described above. The third encounter is shocking. He was visited by a humanoid. He was lying on his side when a powerful flash entered his room. He heard a strange thing immediately afterward. Suddenly, there was something behind him, clutching him, like hugging him. He said it was about 3 to 3.5 feet tall, or less, and it was wearing a suit, like an astronaut or a diving suit. He said the suit was soft, not very tight. He didn't see the face with a mask, and the mask was lead gray. He didn't see any eyes or any shape. He also said the alien spoke to him. So it was a very awkward situation. Just bright light, suddenly there's things behind him. He's laying on his side, and it's kind of like hugging him. And it's wearing a suit, but it's kind of soft. And he says it talked to him. He was very frightened of that thing behind him holding him. And it spoke to him in Portuguese. And it spoke with a strange sound. He said like a computer metallic voice. I don't speak Portuguese, but I'll tell you, it was like, the way he described it was like, take it easy, we're not going to do you any harm. That's how he described it, saying it told him to take it easy. We're not going to do you any harm. And then it disappeared. After this experience, though, he noticed something else. He noticed an object under the skin in his forearm. I believe it was the right forearm. Maybe it was right here. Yeah, it was on the bottom side of his forearm. Okay. He said it was put there during the last encounter. He described it as flexible, plastic. And he had it x-rayed, but it didn't show anything. And what he was doing is he was kind of like, he was able to push here, and it would kind of bend a little bit, And I could say push here and it would go up here, push here and it would go down. So it was moving around under his skin. And when he had it x-rayed, it didn't show anything. I sure wish you would have had it taken out, though. So that was in early 97, I believe. So in July, the story is published in UFO magazine. Okay, July 1997. A couple months go by. On October 2nd, 1997, Yolanda dies. Those that were hoping for more investigations were shocked to find out that there's a new mystery added to these events. On October 2nd, 1997, Yolanda was found dead in his house, with the official cause being asphyxiation. Yeah, asphyxiation. I typed it wrong. It's not clear if it was accidental, suicide, or murder. Now, according to Gerard with UFO Magazine, he felt that Yolanda took his own life due to depression, and it was his own decision. I don't know. That's just one assumption, but nobody knows. We weren't there. I saw pictures. It didn't, I don't know. I guess he hung himself from his headboard somehow. It was, I don't know. I'm not a criminologist. I don't know about all that stuff, but to me it looked kind of strange. And after the story comes out that Yolanda said, suddenly he dies. So who knows what happened? I don't know. So this was in October 2nd, 97. Okay? A few years go by. I think about 10 years. So Gerard and Petit went back to Colares to request records through their act. They have similar acts over there to like FOIA requests. They had a public UFO record there. Now, there were many records to be there. I mean, you remember, he did 3,000 interviews, took a bunch of photographs, 1,500 hours of film, 500 photos, I believe. So there were many records that were hidden from the public for these 30 years. That was just kept confidential. When they were finally granted access to some records, they were only allowed to view 110 photos and 200 documents. Now, I don't have all of those in front of me right now, but I'm sure I can get some. The photos and documents reveal that the government did spend a lot of time researching the incident, though. Photos taken by Captain Yolanda show bright lights in the night sky. And Captain Yolanda's report contains sketches and details and cases that involved both military and residents. So we know he was there. Okay? A lot of these documents have his name on them. He describes some of these pictures in an interview, a videotaped interview, and the thing with pictures, especially in the 70s, it's just a light. So we didn't get to see any video. And it could be anything. Kind of like pictures now, So the report ends with descriptions of the burns and puncture marks that were allegedly caused by the lights. But it offers no answers to what caused them. It doesn't determine the source of the lights, nor do the reports try to debunk this as UFOs or not UFOs. So let's talk about these burns and puncture marks, okay? There's another doctor, Dr. Daniel Rebiso. He has studied the Colares sighting since 1985. He was trying to find out other possible causes for the burn marks. Now, initially there were suspicions that these puncture wounds could have been caused by a bat. However, vampire bat bites, they bleed a lot. There was no bleeding on these Colares marks. The picture I'm going to show you, there's no blood. It doesn't look like they bled. There's no scabs, nothing. So also, it leaves a different type of mark. It leaves a little circle. These were just punctures. So then he thought about mass panic causing self-mutilations of people scratching themselves on their face and their eyes. But the exams didn't support this. So at the end of this, his hypothesis is that the injuries resemble intense directed energy exposure affecting the nervous system, causing burning pain, paralysis, numbness, dizziness. Now, this happened back in 77. These types of weapons were researched in the 60s and 70s, but for directed energy exposure. In the 70s, the delivery system was microwaves, not bright lights. Okay? They're still working on lasers. I think they've fine tuned a lot of that. There's something called the Havana syndrome that kind of made me think about this a little bit. But Havana syndrome more affects, I guess, your cognitive issues, in your ears, I guess, as far as balance goes. But anyway, we're not talking about that. So, another thing, Marco Petit with UFO Magazine, he suggested that the puncture marks and the burn marks were possibly biological sampling, saying that the aliens are possibly trying to create a vaccine for themselves for when they finally do decide to come to Earth and reveal themselves. That way they could have some type of immunity to human disease and illness. So, what do we know for sure? Not too much. We do know that doctors couldn't explain it. Journalists couldn't quite trace it. The military won't define it or tell us what's really going on, and they're still hiding plenty of documents, and the government still remains silent. A lot of the villagers, talk about these ships coming, these crafts are coming out of everywhere. Some are coming out of the sea. Some are coming out of the jungle. Some are coming from space. Interesting, when you compare these 77 incidents, 1977, to the current incidents, we have a lot of drones coming out of the water here, out of the oceans, especially out of California, some in New Jersey coming out of the water, and some just out in the woods. So, this one, unlike modern UFO cases involving Air Force pilots and radar systems and some citizen videos, the Colares event involved rural villagers being physically attacked by intense light and witnessing varying crafts, different kinds of crafts. Remind you, some of these things were 300 feet, according to the military's official records. So this is something they could understand. They could not understand or describe this as anything they had ever seen before. I don't think I'd be able to describe. I don't know. Logically, I used to sound crazy to my wife when I said these things are real, and now that it's starting to become on the news and more mainstream, I'm not so crazy. So anyway, the question remains, what was flying over Colares those nights? So the sketches and the description sound similar to the current drones and UAP sightings. And the people were wondering, why were they being targeted by these bright lights? We don't know. We just know they were. They were being chased. Some of these people said they were being chased through the village and running home, and it didn't matter. Once they got in the house, it still hit them. Captain Hollanda, he didn't want the truth to die with him. He told us. He told all of us. He wants us to know that there's something out there, that we are being visited, and not just by strange crafts, but by alien beings as well. Apparently, they're not too scared to get right up close to you. So we're not alone. Captain Hollanda was there, and he documented everything. Photos, videos, interviews. And years later, only a limited number of documents and photographs are allowed to be reviewed by investigators. There's much more to the story. We may never get to review everything, but Captain Hollanda witnessed it for months, along with those villagers. Many people were hurt by these crafts, and modern society probably would not believe the villagers' stories back then. Or even now. This might just be another legend of the Colares village. But this one here, with the backing of military research conducted by Captain Hollanda and his team, we know that something bizarre was happening. It was so bizarre that at night, the villagers would take turns keeping watch, and they were even throwing fireworks at these things to scare them away. So no official explanation was ever given. However, Captain Hollanda, who was there, in the military records document everything, not just from Captain Hollanda, but from other members of the military that were there. I mean, to me, that's official enough. that something happened. But until all the truth and the records are released, this is going to remain a little bit of a mystery. I believe something happened. I'm not going to go with the government was flying drones and aiming bright lights and scaring the heck out of these residents. There was a thought about guerrilla warfare. There were a communist guerrilla regime down there in the jungle. One thought was that they had some kind of weapon that they were using to scare off the villagers so they could bring in more military and weapons closer to Brazil. That didn't explain it because none of those weapons existed, especially for, guerrilla faction. So we don't know what that was out there. What we do know is what Captain Hollandes said. We do know we have his sketches. We have some of the other military sketches. Got some photos. We got a description of a humanoid in a spacesuit or kind of diving suit. Something horrific happened down there. And it seems like these things happen in waves because every once in a while you hear stuff like the drones. Last year, we didn't hear about them attacking people in 24, I think. End of 24 or 23. But they're still out there. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining me. I'm sorry this isn't all pictures and news clips. This is a lot for me to read. I did quite a bit of research. I tried to sum it down as much as I could. It's about 10 pages. There's a lot more out there. So thanks for joining me, guys. Like, subscribe. If you like these videos, just hit the like button and subscribe. Do me that favor, guys. I appreciate you joining me. And I got to find another subject here. Another incident, because I'm starting to find, even though I haven't gotten to reporting a lot of them, a lot of these things seem similar. And that's been like that for centuries, when I look at this. A lot of these events don't really change. We don't know what's happening. It keeps happening. So I'd like to get to the bottom of it. And maybe by putting all these stories together, we can have some building blocks and maybe we can come up with some kind of answer. What do they want? Why are they here? What's happening? I'll see you in the next one, guys. Thanks for joining me. This has been Quiet Mysteries. We'll see you next time, guys.